It's with the OTC, Eddie Encina from the Tampa Bay Times. Make sure you guys subscribe to the Tampa Bay Times. Support local, man. Can't say that enough, and especially with everything going on with the Rays and the new ownership and the stadium and everything going on with the Buccaneers and the Bulls. Our whole crew over there at the Tampa Bay Times crushing it. Leading the way, the OTC, the original Ooze, Ed Encina. What's going on, buddy? How are you?
Going on, buddy? I've got my pupperoo here taking a nap. So,
how's it going over there with the bars?
Pretty good.
Yeah. Chilling.
We're just chilling here, getting ready for a season opener. You know.
What does he think about the big guy, 6'9", fourth line?
He likes him. He's he thinks he's a potential keeper, but we'll have to see. Well, we'll start knowing tonight. That's for sure.
6'9". It sounds like a Lil Jon song. 6'9", playing fourth line. Left his car in Vegas, didn't have a dime. What a crazy story.
Did you just make that up?
Off the top of the dome, baby.
Wow.
Off the top of the dome. Carter Douglas. I mean, what the heck, man? I mean,
yeah.
A pretty wild story.
Curtis Douglas.
I keep calling him Carter. Curtis Douglas. I mean, just looking at him today, I mean, he was taller than me sitting down on the bench. I mean, this is a wild story, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a big boy. And, I think, as much as the Lightning do not really want to engage in some of the stuff that's gone on, with the Panthers, the past couple meetings, going back to the playoffs last year, I think the Lightning rather play hockey in a lot of these contexts. But I think the past week, it became very clear to them that, they weren't going to get much help from league office. So that they were going to have to kind of, get tougher, get one of those guys who will protect the stars. And that's not to say that like the Lightning aren't a tough team, that they don't have a bunch of guys who'll defend their teammates. But I think it's another thing to have guys who just by their presence on the ice, kind of invoke a certain level of, we got to, if you do something, you're going to pay. And I think Curtis Douglas does that. I think that, he comes in, obviously there's the size. I don't know if you've seen the fights that he's gotten into, but this guy has massive reach because he is 6'9". So you're not gonna land much stuff on him unless you're a big guy yourself. So and I guess at the end of the day, it is a little bit of a surprise to see him in the lineup tonight on opening night. He's going to make his NHL debut after being claimed up, put on waivers, on Sunday and claimed on Monday from Utah. But I think at the end of the day, it's all good and well to have a guy like that in the lineup, but he's got to also be able to do a lot of other things to help you win games. And I think tonight it's kind of a trial by fire in a lot of ways to see if he can be that guy. It's interesting because he's going to take a spot basically of Jack Finley, who, has worked all camp to earn a spot, to earn, the 12th, 13th, 14th forward spot. And he's going to sit because I think it's important for the Lightning right now to kind of, if they know what they have in Jack Finley from drafting him and developing him, I think now they've got to figure out what they have in Curtis Douglas. And, that starts tonight.
Surprised that Finley's the odd man out here?
Yeah, a little bit. But again, like I think they know what they've gotten him. I think they know what he's done. He's been healthy. He's done everything. I mean, he played 6 preseason games, so that's more than anyone else on the team. So they got to see everything they wanted to see from him. And also he's a guy who has been injury prone. So I mean, maybe you kind of ease him in a little bit into the lineup, see where he fits in best. But again, there are some things that Finley has shown that he's done that really helped his team. And it goes from the fact that he's shown he can play PK. Obviously he's a physical presence, the net front. He's a guy who'll go in the corners, do all the little things, plays a tough game, but also I think one of the big things that won him a spot was being able to play on the PK and also being able to be a face-off guy, especially in the defensive and neutral zones, because that's something they're constantly trying to improve on. There were times in the season last year where they weren't great in the face-off circle and especially in their own end. And he's a guy who can do that. Both in 5-on-5 in the PK and even on the penalty kill. He's a guy you can bring out there, take a face off and shift off. So he does a lot of things that are good. And But again, I think right now, you've got to see what Curtis Douglas is made of, especially since he hasn't played in the NHL, and like you said, I don't think he's going to go out there and start running at guys. I think his goal is going to be to really kind of solidify that fourth line with him and Pontus Holmberg and Connor Geekie, and really kind of, they want to, taking away from the Panthers, be one of those teams that can, really just roll four lines. And I think that's, there's a lot of things that go into that, but I think it's kind of seeing whether he fits into that kind of role.
Yeah, don't be surprised if it gets, a little hot and heavy tonight with Brady Tkachuk, because he's another one of those guys. Obviously, Matthew's brother, he has a little bit of a snarl to his game. So does Tim Stützle. So I don't think tonight's going to just be like, oh, nice, knick-knack, paddywhack. Everything's going to be all nice tonight. I think tonight's going to be hot and heavy right off the rip.
Yeah, sure.
What do you make of Connor Geekie, man? Because I'm a guy, I'm on record saying that I think ultimately his best spot is going to be on the first line with Point and Kucherov when all is said and done, just because I feel like his game is the closest to what we saw from Andre Palat, big physical game. He's got a great shot. Kucherov needs to play with a little bit more of a shooter. That's why him and Stamkos worked out so well. But you have a guy that's a little bit more physical, has got better legs. I think in the long run, Geekie makes sense on that line. We know Gensel's going to start there, but surprised at all that Geekie's this far down on the lineup playing on that fourth line wing and not in the middle six.
A little bit. I do think that, to start the season, I honestly think he's best fits in a middle six role, maybe on that third line, and kind of see him work his way up. I mean, we saw that with Gage Gonsalves, to a certain degree. He was in the bottom six and kind of worked his way up, and now he's one of those guys who is kind of those guys where you can kind of put him in anywhere. And let's face it, what we see as these lines, today on October 9th are not going to be what we see, in April, let alone in a couple of weeks, and that's one thing with Coop. He doesn't hesitate to in-game, shift to shift, change these things up. I do expect to see Connor up there, with that top line on occasion. I really liked what he did with the Hagel, Cirelli line too. Especially, in the kind of game, the matchup kind of game that they play, and kind of the puck hound game that they play. So I wouldn't look too much into him being sitting there right now today on the fourth line. I think that they have no doubt great plans for Connor Geekie. I think he's done in camp. He showed a lot in terms of, well, first off, I think he showed a lot when he came back from Syracuse last year. But I think he's shown a lot in camp this year in terms of really kind of knowing where he needed to improve. And that was, start off with his skating. He spent a lot of time with the Lightning skating coaches in Toronto in the off season and worked on that. And I think you saw that in that, second to last preseason game here at Benchmark International Arena. It's going to be a process.
It is. Trust me. I was ready this morning. I said, look on the ice. Who do you see? Morning skate at Benchmark International Arena. It doesn't have the same flow, man. Sorry, Cult. I'm sorry. Sorry, Cult of Personality fans out there.
Yeah. So, that play that he made, kind of spinning Seth Jones around and scoring that goal. A lot of people, it was great in that form, but a lot of people might not think of everything that involves in that. And it all starts with, the skating and the confidence in the skating. And I think that we all know that Connor Geekie has the ability to be a not just an NHL player, but a scoring NHL player who can score, 20, 30, maybe 40 goals a year, at his, ceiling. So I think, you want to kind of let him grow into that role. And I think there's no doubt that we've seen that confidence grow. We've seen that I think last year at the point that he got sent down, he had kind of lost a little bit of his confidence, and he had also kind of lost just kind of who he was. And he's a scorer, and so I don't think putting him on that fourth line necessarily changes that. I do think that, like he'll have the puck on his stick a lot. But at the same time, I think you'll see him in different roles because, he is one of them. And when we think about the future and we think about these, some of the prospects that are coming up, and we have that core, right? That group of, 29 to, 33, if you count, not counting Eddie and McDonough, who've been around a while. But, I think front and center of that young group that they need to really develop and become dudes is Connor Geekie. So, I think we'll see him in a lot of different roles over the course of the season.
And I thought it was very interesting, the whole thing with the Panthers and the Lightning and all the penalty minutes, and the difference between a beat writer and a columnist. And a lot of times, a beat writer is not injecting as much of his or her own opinion, but what you wrote was a little bit different, than what we normally see from a beat writer. And I loved it. And I know you catch, and I love you because you're one of my pals, but I think you're a talented writer. But it just seemed like it was the right time to take that angle, right? And having this conversation with Eric yesterday and just some of the different people, where it's like the league looked at this in a vacuum of one game. And it's weird because they didn't really look at the cause that turned into this effect. So what just and of course, everybody out there, subscribe to the Tampa Bay Times, tampabay.com/sports. Go check it. I read the whole thing. It was great. But just your overall reaction to the discipline that was handed down, because, it's one thing to discipline the players, but to fine the organization and to fine John Cooper, like, that's like, dude, you want people to police the game themselves. Shit like this is going to happen. So just your thoughts and why you ended up writing it the way that you did.
Yeah. So, I think there's, the way we cover sports now at the Times, I think, the traditional like beat writer kind of mentality has kind of evolved a little bit. I think that, in a lot of ways, we've had this discussion before, I think is that, if you want a game story and you want, a notebook, you can find that in a lot of different places. A lot of people are either, with TV the way it is, a lot of people are watching the game. They already,
right.
And I think that now one thing that I've tried to evolve a lot into my coverage is a little bit more analysis, and analysis coming from knowing that, and this isn't like, I'm not trying to brag here or anything, but I'm with the team probably more than anyone,
right.
And, we travel with the team, we're with them every playoffs. I don't think there's been since I've been on the beat, I don't think there's been a Lightning Panthers game that I've missed, and it's so, I've seen all of this develop over the years, all the playoff skate series, all, over the past 5 years. So, I think that I can speak to some of this stuff, having seen it all, firsthand, and not just that, the access that we do get to players, coaches, front office people within the organization and within the league, to be honest, and like, right. I made some calls after that game on Saturday to try to figure out what some of those guys were thinking up there. And, I still kind of got off the phone a little miffed, because, again, I think the most interesting thing about it. So backing up here, obviously we can look back to, the back and forth of the playoff series last year,
right.
That started with Matthew Tkachuk going after Nikita Kucherov in game one, carried over into the Hagel hit on Barkov in game two, Tkachuk going after Jake Gensel in game two, well, we can go, then the Ekblad hit, blah, 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 and everything that happened in game four. And then we can go into, what happened Thursday night with AJ Greer hit on Hagel, which was completely unprovoked. Hagel is clearly going off the ice for a line change, and this guy just kind of sucker punches him. And in the context, what Sabrin did to Ekblad is really no different in that context.
No.
And I think the league's perspective on this was that the Lightning had no interest in playing hockey, that they were going to bring these guys up with a specific intent on payback. And that's, I don't think anyone can necessarily argue that to a certain degree. Now, having said that, the Lightning can also say, after what happened Thursday, and, now we've got to sit Brandon Hagel to make sure he's okay for the home opener a week later. Why would we play any of our great players? Why would we play them on Saturday? So right. we call up what I now call the Syracuse Six, and, which included Sabrin and Roman Schmidt, who, with all respect to their games, are there for a reason. Everyone knew it, and then it kind of all plays out the way it did. I mean, I went through a bevy of emotions watching that game live in Sunrise of like, this is completely stupid. Like like, this is what it's come to on both teams, and I do think that the fine that went down on the Lightning and Cooper, I think the fine on Cooper has more to do with John Cooper is. With the fact that
Right.
he is one of the more respected coaches in the league, that he is the longest tenured coach in the league. He's front and center on a lot of things. When
Was it a you should know better kind of fine?
Being a voice, he's going to coach in the Olympics, Hockey Canada. That you should know better than this. They obviously know that there's nothing that goes on with the Tampa Bay Lightning that John Cooper doesn't have his arms wrapped around it. So I think that actually had a lot to do with it. Which, is that fair? Is that not fair? We can argue about that all day. But at the end of the day, it was very interesting that in their explanation of looking back at the history of incidents between these teams, it was only in reference to the Sabourin suspension, and it wasn't in reference to the fines that were handed down by the Hockey Ops department to the Lightning and Cooper. And I think that's where I don't get it. You know what I mean? The interpretation of the rules and the interpretation of time and place, and a lot of this stuff can be argued, back and forth, the way you see it, stuff like that. Like, I thought the Verhaeghe hit on Zemgus Girgensons was worse than the Mosier hit on Jesper Boquist, but that one doesn't get anything. But at the end of the day, like, how can you rationalize it with any seriousness to this matter that the Lightning are completely to blame for all this, but yet the Panthers don't receive anything, as a team, and $100,000 fine that's a significant amount of change, but I don't think it's going to change the Lightning's bottom line in terms of the way they spend their success. It's not going to change how many community hero donations they make in the regular season. So
that'd be great if that was the first two. Tonight inside of the community hero. Sorry guys, we need that $50,000 to pay for whatever the hell that was in Sunrise.
But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't. If you're looking to kind of regulate this and what it's become, that didn't do it. And we all know hockey. This is a part of hockey to a certain extent, and the players. You give the players the opportunity to regulate the game, and then the league comes in after that when maybe things do get heated. So, but at the end of the day, to look at all of this, going back to last year, going back to beyond that, I remember back in the day when, Anthony Duclair was slashing Nikita Kucherov in the playoffs, and then they end up becoming teammates. But there's no doubt that this is a great rivalry. I don't know if Thursday night and Saturday night necessarily made this a better rivalry for the right reasons. Because, when I did talk to Brandon Hagel before all this, I was doing this, just kind of sit down with him, for our special section. And one of the first questions I asked him was like, do you think this thing's going to carry over? And he was like, I don't want it to, because I'm more concerned about beating them. Like, at the end of the day, it's about beating these guys, and yes, all of that is a part of it. But, that he didn't see it carrying over. And then, a few days later, you see, AJ Greer, basically just attack him, but it's tough because I don't think the league, there's so many, you can point your finger at so many different places, and it's just, for the Lightning to be the only one that's under the microscope on this just doesn't seem right. And I think the league should be under the microscope for it as well as the Panthers, because they really haven't done enough to make it that way. But in terms of writing a story, I'll be honest, like, I wrote a lot of that based on emotion. I think that's one of the great things of being able to cover a game live where you're at, because, as much as guys say it can be unfair when they have to talk to us, 10 minutes after a game throughout the emotion of it. I think for our perspective, when we're covering teams, sometimes it's great to be able to write with that perspective, because again, I was muttering to myself watching this game, and part of it was because the officials had lost complete control of it, and no one knew. You could look at the game summary, and it was completely just a mess. Like, we were like, amongst ourselves, we were trying to decide, okay, how many guys actually got ejected from this game? Because at that point they hadn't given Sabourin a match penalty on the sheet, and like all this stuff on the sheet, and like how much we talk all the time about how it's really hard for some of these on ice officials to get things right because it happens fast and everything like that. But this one was just, I felt bad for them too, just because it was just a complete mess, because guys were getting taken off and misconducts were getting handed off. It seemed like every every minute, in that game. And at the end of the day, like, yes, that's not a hockey game. What we saw Saturday wasn't a hockey game, but at the end of the day, I think the Lightning felt that they kind of had to do it, right or wrong. But again, like, I just don't think that the league really helped in the sense of moving this thing forward, because it's gonna, it's gonna happen again.
It's not over. It's not over, Ed. And I just want to see if there's going to be beef between the Panthers writers and the Lightning writers. We'll see. So I'm ready to throw down, baby. I'm about to do my best Scott Sabrin. But watch out, George Richards. I love George, man. They have we get along so great with their media. There we go, in the house. All right, before I let you go, man, what's the ceiling for this team this year? The expectations, because I look at the dealing with injuries to Tkachuk and Barkov, and this team and some of the adjustments that they've made. Sky's the limit for the Lightning, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously those injuries set the Panthers back a little bit, and at the end of the day, I think that last year's team was a good team and it was a contender. And I think they've gotten better. I think they've even gotten better in the past couple of days by adding, Curtis Douglas. Right. I think, to me, the biggest question, to be honest, I think is something that we all haven't necessarily talked enough about is Andrei Vasilevskiy's health, because I think it all begins and starts with 88 back there. And, we saw how good he was last year when he felt good. We saw how much it was a struggle for him throughout the entire season 2 years ago when he had dealt with the surgery. And I think that, as much as he's a guy who works so hard in the off season, and that maybe, missing 9 days of training camp and only playing in one preseason game doesn't rule out all of this work that he did in the off season. I still have some concern in terms of until I see that. And I think that's why they're carrying 3 goaltenders right now. It'll be interesting to see how long they do it. I think when they no longer do it is when everyone in that organization is completely confident about Vasilevskiy. But take that out of it. I think that, this is a team that can contend for a cup again. I think that, there is a little bit more sense of urgency because they are older. They are, this window does kind of start to seem to be closing to a certain degree, just on age of some of the players. Obviously Kucherov has 2 more years on his deal. Vasilevskiy has a couple more years 3 more years on his deal as they approach the mid 30s of their career. So the time's now. And I think that this team's frustrated by the fact that they didn't get up at the first round the past 3 years. I think all this stuff that's happened the past week. And so I think all that continues to put a chip on the shoulder of this team. And I think that's a good thing, because not that they've been, not that they haven't had that or haven't had that extra momentum going in, but I think it can only help them, in terms of, knowing that this is kind of go time. And that what's happened the past 3 years, isn't good enough according to the bar that this team set.
You can call him Ed, Eduardo, or Eddie. I'm going to call him the OTC and the original Oos. Eddie Encina from the Tampa Bay Times. Again, guys, I can't stress to you enough. Support local Tampa Bay Times, all of our folks. I rattled it off before. Right now with the Rays new owners, the Buccaneers and the Bulls doing their thing, the stadium stuff, and of course the Tampa Bay Lightning opening their season tonight. Subscribe to the Tampa Bay Times. It may not mean much to you, but it means a lot to a whole hell of a lot of other people. Get somebody a subscription for their birthday or for Christmas or just something. Do something right. We always talk about supporting local here on the Recher podcast, and I've got a subscription, and I put my money where my mouth is, baby, and I read everything from the Tampa Bay Times in the sports section with our folks, leading with our guy Eddie Encina. Ed, appreciate it, buddy. Eddie in the Yard on Twitter/X, and I'll see you tonight, Big Goose. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, Rich.
See you, buddy.